Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a show for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. This podcast is brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox, a new online collection of practical, trusted resources made for those who support global missions from home. Visit us online at globalmissionstoolbox.com to register for access to this growing collection of tools for senders. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to many friends as Mags.
Hello, everyone. It's actually just Maddie here today. Mags is traveling for a conference, and so he's not able to be here, but we both look forward to joining you again in 2 weeks. Now, before we get into today's conversation, I want to mention that last week I sent out an exciting update to the Global Missions Toolbox mailing list, and it included the launch date for our online community. The community will be launching on October 18th, 2022. In our listener survey that we did over the summer, a few respondents shared that they would enjoy the opportunity to send in questions for our podcast guests or participate in live events. So we are looking forward to being able to have some two-way conversation with our podcast listeners and facilitating conversation among other missions-minded church leaders and members. If you're not already a part of our mailing list, you can sign up at globalmissionspodcast.com/newsletter or by clicking the link in our show notes. You will receive announcements of new podcasts so you never miss an episode. You will receive a list of new tools on relevant topics so that you can apply the concepts you learn about from our guests. And you will get further details about the online community and be the first to hear how you can join. Now, let's get into today's episode with Jeannie. Our guest today is Jeannie Marie, author of the 2018 book Across the Street and Around the World, Following Jesus to the Nations in Your Neighborhood and Beyond. As the title of her book implies, Jeannie helps people go both across the street and around the world in order to reach some of the 3 billion people with least access to the gospel. Jeannie also offers the Neighbors and Nations course, which is an 8-week digital course experience that helps Christ followers offer Jesus and the kingdom of God to the nations near them. Jeannie has lived in India with her husband and 4 children and has also worked befriending international students and refugees. She is now a global strategist for an international organization that recruits, trains, and sends people to live overseas in around 50 Muslim countries. And this is our second conversation with Jeannie on the podcast, so we're glad to have you back. We talked with Jeannie back in 2020, so to hear that conversation, you can check out episode 148 called 4 Ways to Increase Your Missional Intelligence. Jeannie, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you so much. It is such an honor to be with you again.
Well, we know a little bit about your story, and listeners can go back and hear some from the previous episode as well, but it sounds like you started serving in missions overseas a bit later in your life. So I'm sure that means there was lots of direction and redirection from God, but would you tell us a little bit about your missions journey as our listeners get to know you?
Yeah, I used to think that all cross-cultural workers were translators, skinny, secondhand dressers, and lived in a tribe because that's what I was used to, right? I was 18 when I came back to the U.S. My parents were involved in tribal work overseas. I used to think you couldn't be an artist or a writer or a business person to be a cross-cultural worker. I used to think if you went into secular work, you couldn't go into global missionary work. I used to think that making money or a profit didn't mix with ministry. I used to think poverty alleviation was missions. Okay, so all of these things that I used to think play into our topic today and was a reason why I didn't get involved with global work until I was maybe in my late 20s and, welcoming international students and refugees. But then, my family, we didn't move to India until we were in our early 40s. So I had to overcome some of these misconceptions.
That's helpful to hear. And just wonderful the experience that you've had that has led you to write some of the things you've written in your book and share some of the topics that we'll get to touch on today. So, as we mentioned, Jeannie is the author of the book Across the Street and Around the World. And we actually had the privilege, myself and some coworkers in our organization, of reading that book together and meeting every week to discuss some of the chapters. And we just found it so helpful. But Jeannie, would you tell us about what led you to write this book?
I really wanted people who were pretty ordinary, not quite used to the idea of global overseas work, to be able to pick up this book and read it from the beginning, thinking, okay, I could be part of the 99% of the people that maybe would reach the nations near me, and how to do it, right? So it's simple, easy to do. But then by the end of the book, the last half of the book, I am really helping people wrestle with what would it look like if I changed my address. And so I wanted to put out like new language that would break the stereotypes of an overseas worker so we could recruit the 1% that actually need to go. Those people could see themselves in this story. And I was just like bringing them along a journey. So I'm so glad you guys did the book study. There's hundreds of book studies all around the country and the world now. And I like that, because that just means ordinary small groups are doing it and getting infected with something that's not just God's thing, it's all of our thing.
And I think we might get to some resources later, but on your website, I noticed as well, you have lots of accompanying resources for small groups who want to go through your book. So we can get to some of that later, but so many helpful ways to get the most out of your book. So thank you for the time that you put into writing that. Well, today we are talking with Jeannie about an idea from chapter 9 of her book. That chapter is entitled Wrestling with Calling, Gifting, and Personality. And in that chapter, Jeannie describes 5 Goer personality types. So Jeannie, can you tell us a little bit about how you went about discovering these 5 personality types?
Yeah, I really started to notice that actually there was a big segment of our believing population that were left out of the equation of moving overseas because we didn't see themselves that way. And then I started to notice also some people living overseas that didn't quite fit the category that we traditionally think of as overseas workers. And I grew up with so many workers overseas, and then until I was 18, and then I sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people overseas, interacted with so many, and I started to see a pattern that there were 5 different types of people that we could recruit, but also that were going. And there was less of some than another. And I put together that quiz and I started putting out into the world, and it just really resonated with people. They're like, that's me. I never knew that I could be one of these people that could go. And so it started to really resonate and take traction. And so I'm really glad you're asking me to talk about this.
Well, I know it resonated with our team here at the podcast too, because as we were going through your book, that kind of jumped out as a topic that we might want to ask you back for. So I'm glad you're here. I think it's helpful to have some categories to think through, and maybe people find aspects of each of these personalities that will come to and can resonate with various aspects, or maybe there's just one that they'll really jump into, but we're excited to dive into this.
And there is a quiz that we'll put in the show notes, right? So you can listen to these 5 personality types and try to figure out who you are just by listening, but also you can just go take that quiz too, and it will lead you to a lot of the information I'm talking about.
Perfect. Yes, I actually took that quiz just before our interview today, and definitely recommend our listeners go find that for themselves.
I know what you are. I saw it.
Do you? Good.
We'll have our listeners guess. Put in the comments. Guess what you think Maddie is.
What kind of goer am I? So we are about to go through those 5 types of goers that Jeannie has identified. So listeners, as you do listen, or as you take the quiz, maybe there's one of them that jumps out that you think you kind of fit into, that describes you well. And Jeannie's going to offer some words of advice that you will be able to learn from. Or even as you're listening to this conversation, maybe you have someone in mind that you're discipling. And this is a great opportunity to think through whether these 5 goer types describe the way that God has created them, someone in your life. And this might give you some inspiration on how to encourage them and how to challenge them as well. So let's jump in and let's meet these 5 kinds of global goers. What is the first kind of global goer?
Let's talk about the bleeding hearts first, because that's who we traditionally think of. The Mother Teresas of the world, the people that say, I just want to help someone. And they have deep compassion and empathy. They want to help the downtrodden, strengthen the vulnerable, empower the poor. They're the people we think of as crying with the widows and holding baby orphans in Africa, feeding the hungry. So transformation, holistic, living out the kingdom of God with your hands. Those kinds of words really resonate with bleeding hearts. And actually, they resonate a lot with the younger generation as well, too, because justice kind of issues come into the bleeding heart. And those people know that the good news of the gospel includes action and not just words, and that the kingdom of God should bring something good in this life, as well as the life to come. So they love to help. It what makes them most fulfilled. And when you are helping someone, it's actually living in your sweet spot. The other thing about these people is they actually want to wash the dishes. And, like me, I'm like, I'll do it, but I don't really want to. But they actually love to serve.
So as you think about the bleeding hearts, these people who want to serve, and that is just something they enjoy and desire, what is a word of advice that you would like to share with people who might fall into this category?
So probably encouragement first is that you do recognize that people aren't just a number. They aren't just projects. They feel cared for and loved by you. So just embrace that. And that loving unlovable people does usually come a little easier for you. You can shed comforts a little easier. So my advice for bleeding hearts then also is, most bleeding hearts say, well, I'm going to be a nurse or a doctor, and therefore that's how I'm going to serve people overseas. And while you can, it is difficult to practice, overseas. And I say to bleeding hearts, like, let's learn about preventative medicine. Let's get a degree in community development or poverty alleviation, because holding an orphan is wonderful, but let's go into the deeper root causes of poverty and let's get educated. The bleeding hearts, we need them to get educated in what truly does alleviate poverty in places where the kingdom of God is least seen, right? And I'm going to say this almost on every part, is to team up with another type. And a strategic thinker is the type you want to team up with.
Well, I thought that was interesting in your chapter, talking about who the bleeding heart might team well with. And that actually leads us to the second one. So unless there's more words of advice for the bleeding heart, I would say let's jump to the strategic thinker and explain that type of global goer a bit.
Yes, the strategic thinker. And if you're guessing, Maddie is a strategic thinker, right? So I am also part strategic thinker. So they're motivated by the numbers. They have a lot of passion, but they have a logic. It must make sense, right? They know these statistics that 6,000 unreached people groups are left in the world. When they hear those kinds of things, their heart starts beating or their mind starts working, right? They get worked up thinking there's only 5 cross-cultural workers going to every 1 million Hindus, or 700 workers for every million people who already call themselves Christian, right? So these statistics that actually a lot of us tend to throw out will resonate with strategic thinkers. It stirs them to action, and they want to logically assess and solve this imbalance, this problem. It disturbs them. And so they might incorrectly assume, though, strategic thinkers, that they shouldn't be involved in this because they're visionary, they're big picture, they're looking at the mastermind, putting things together, right? And they're going wide and going big, and they might not see themselves in this picture.
That's a helpful explanation, and certainly so many of those things I resonated, which makes sense why I got that answer on your quiz. What is a word of advice you'd have for strategic thinkers? Because I know there were some pieces I was convicted by.
So first, an encouragement is that they are voices of logic and productivity. They do provide necessary big picture thinking. They can see the future, find ways to get there. So embrace those wonderful qualities that God gave you. You likely know how to efficiently run organizations and teams and promote strategies, right? So here's my advice is that we need more strategic thinkers to get involved in this. Spirituality is strategic, and it's okay to be strategic and spiritual at the same time. And strategic thinkers need to embrace that. And so does the church world, that it's okay to actually think when we are reaching the nations, not just using our heart. The Spirit can work with strategy. The other thing is that strategic thinkers are often involved already in very big things, important things, good things right where they are, maybe running organizations and so they're ambitious, they're usually driven, and it's a little bit more difficult to attract them to the cause of overseas work unless we can say, look at the numbers, look at how your mind, your vision can make a difference. And also don't let your busy schedule, just because you're a lawyer or already a CEO or an entrepreneur, like it might be good, but there might be even something better, just to think about it.
Absolutely. That point stuck with me, that strategic thinkers might tend to be more busy or overly involved and that sort of thing, that having the space to actually consider what God is calling them to do with their gifts might be challenging, and taking that time to process where God is leading. And I thought that was a helpful point and a helpful caution for us strategic thinkers.
I'll add something here is in the quiz, I also give some ways you can go after this vision. I'll just mention one is for strategic thinkers, you need to take a 24-hour silent retreat, right? Where you're just getting away from everything and allowing the Spirit to speak with you and look at the numbers and do research and things like that. That will help you to be able to discern something like this.
Well, I appreciate what you said as well about being Spirit-led doesn't disqualify some of these more strategic aspects in being involved in missions. And I think there's a good balance to find there. So very interesting. Well, let's jump from this one, even though I want to ask you all my questions about this personality type in specific. Let's go on to the third kind of global goer. What are they and how would you describe them?
So these are the obedient disciples, and this is who we traditionally talk to from the pulpit. We say, this is how we speak of the Great Commission. It is our responsibility to go into all the world. The obedient disciple will be confident and resolute in this commitment. We must go because Jesus said to. They're ambassadors for Christ because it is the right thing to do. They take Jesus's words seriously to go to the nations, and they feel most fulfilled and closest to God when they are obeying and doing the things they believe they should do. That's a great word for obedient disciples, is should. And they usually are attending a life group, attending church regularly. Maybe they're an elder or serving in some capacity, read their Bible regularly. You get the picture. So, but we all aspire to be disciples, right? So this isn't this isn't the right answer, but it is just a way that I'm describing how this is what most motivates them. They're going to go, God said it, we should go do it, period.
Very helpful explanation there. I think there's lots of encouragement a obedient disciple could find in some of these tendencies in their personality. What are some encouragements that you might point to in terms of the obedient disciple?
So one is they're very persevering. They're the ones that last on the field because they just, the obedience part just really motivates them. They're committed to integrity, to living out their beliefs. Now, we all need to be each of these types a little bit, right? But so we all need to live out, committed to integrity, live out our beliefs. But more than most types, they do what they say, live what they preach, are able to stand as righteous people before God. And so let's do a few challenges, right? Is sometimes they get sidetracked from considering overseas work because they're really committed to their family, to taking care of the local church. And they think, how can I leave my current responsibilities? Responsibility is a big word for obedient disciples. How can I leave them? And then safety is much more of a concern for obedient disciples. So they might not go to Muslim countries, for example, where it's statistically not as safe. And so they may be more cautious about doing crazy things that are perceived as crazy, right? And so my advice is to spend some time surrendering your family, your safety, security to God and letting him lead you if this is what he would like for you. And then also to get outside of the four walls of your church and to team up with an adventure seeker, an adventure traveler, team up with one of those types so you can get out there and get some experience doing it.
I really appreciated what you said about the obedient disciples and just the perseverance that they would bring and the longevity that they can often bring to these places that God has called them. And that is something very encouraging, and good words of advice here too. In just a moment, Jeannie will describe 2 more global goer personality types. Before we get to that part of the conversation, I'd like to take just a minute to share about a tool that we hope will be helpful to you and your church. The What Kind of Global Goer Are You quiz is a tool that Jeannie has created to help you identify which of these 5 goer types you are. This 10-question quiz will help you find out what motivates you to make a difference in the world. When you complete the quiz, not only will you have a better understanding of how God has created you and how you can serve Him, you will also receive a free copy of Chapter 9 of Jeannie's book. That chapter is called Wrestling with Calling, Gifting, and Personality. It explores some of the ideas that we are talking about today in more detail. You can get access to this tool in our show notes for this episode or at globalmissionstoolbox.com. We are back with Jeannie Marie, author of Across the Street and Around the World. So we're going to jump right back in to the next goer type. What is the 4th kind of goer?
That is the adventure seeker. Okay, these people are the apostolic leaders. They're willing to go to the hardest, farthest people and places where Jesus is least known. They want to do something that nobody else dares to do. They have a thirst for the edge and a grin on their face while they're doing it, right? So many times I look at these people and I have heard them, they look me in the eye and they tell me, I really like to travel. If I moved overseas or I went on a short-term trip, like I would just have so much fun. It just can't be what God has for me because it would be too much fun. I would really love it. And I want to say to you, adventure seekers, God has put that in your heart. He has shaped you that way for a reason and to embrace it. Okay, you're the ones that want to go on a trip to climb Mount Everest or go water rafting in the Amazon. Like, let's redeem some of those things for God's glory and go do them in some strategic country, right? There's my strategic thinker hat talking. I just want to say that they're more willing than other types to go to the hard places. And I want to encourage you that you are not disqualified from this great task. We want you. We want you to be involved and we want to walk with you. And you're going to team up with a type as well, probably an obedient disciple who's going to help you stay focused and help you stay grounded. A meaning and purpose person would work really well too. So we want you.
Yeah, just fun to hear this type of personality type saying, oh, maybe this would be too fun. Maybe I'd enjoy it too much. But hearing you say that although missions and involves our lives as believers involves sacrifice, it's not wrong to enjoy these things that God has called us to. And maybe that's something to take advantage of for God's glory and redeem. I love how you said that. That's helpful. So what is a piece of advice you might have for the adventure seeker?
Yeah, one is you're up for this. You're likely physically healthy, energetic, focused on the prize. You are going to go to the most dangerous places. And I'm not saying it's not going to be hard and suffering, but when I say those words, you're like, give it to me. I want to suffer. I want to have risk. And so you don't take no for an answer. And I want you to embrace the fact that you are going to find a solution to a problem, probably just by going and doing it, right? You're going to just dive in. You're going to pave new paths and persevere in hard places. You're the ones that are going to eat the food and swat the bugs and sweat the sweat, right? So go and do it. Just go and do it. And I would say the challenge for this type is you likely don't fit in the regular church-going crowd. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you have tattoos and long hair. Maybe you just didn't like that on the inside, right? But you might not fit. And so people might really misunderstand you. And you have a little bit of resistance to the status quo. So this makes you wonder, like, am I really cut out for this? And so you're going to need to pursue mentors who value your type and who understand you, value spiritual accountability. You can't be a lone ranger in this. You need to go with other people. You need the sidekick Tonto and the whole village behind you so you don't crash and burn. The other thing is you might be very addicted to success in the business world or thrill seeking, video gaming. You might not commit to being an apostolic leader, but let me tell you, let's call you out and let's shape you who you were meant to be into one that can go into the hardest, most dangerous places in the world. You're the one that wouldn't mind getting shot in the street. There's not a lot of us that are like that. So come on, let's go.
That's a great encouragement, and great encouragement not to do this alone, but do this in community and with mentors who love you and appreciate you and can really challenge you. Let's get to the last type of global goer. What is the fifth kind?
Okay, this is the meaning and purpose person, or the meaning and purpose champion. Now, this is my main type. I want to make a difference in the world, you say. You are motivated by purpose, and it's really easy to ask meaning and purpose people to get involved in what we're doing because they want to champion causes. And they would throw themselves into selling nuts and bolts if you told them that it might result in a spaceship that would find a new planet from which to broadcast a save the world message. So we can cast this vision to champion a cause. And especially if you can use your unique talents, your gifting, and be different and have deep influence, then you really would get involved in things like this. And there are many. I'm going to say uneducated guess, maybe a third of us overseas are meaning and purpose people because we really gravitate towards the championing a cause overseas. And so you also are not deterred by the fact that catalyzing thousands of people toward Jesus, that sounds impossible to a lot of people, but you actually believe it can be done. And so positivity is a very big strength. And I will tell you, meaning and purpose people, when you meet other meaning and purpose people, you will feel bonded. They will be your kindred friends for life. And so you need to go overseas with other meaning and purpose people, and you will meet them there, and it will just light you up. If you feel like you maybe don't fit in this shallow kind of secular world that we live in of Instagram and social media and fakeness, and you just want authenticity, those kinds of things will really light up a meaning and purpose person.
Very interesting. I like the aspect of optimism and faith that you see in this group of people who believe that these things are possible with God's help. What advice would you have for the meaning and purpose people?
Yeah, really embrace the idea that you've got great ideas and you're great with people. Genuinely, people like you and you're a joy to work with. Embrace those positivity, the belief. Don't let the people who are going to put a hole in your bubble, just smile and nod and keep going. Here's the challenge. Some advice is that sometimes you want to do everything. You will gravitate towards any cause that's put in front of you, and you might end up championing other people's causes. I did that for a lot of years because people asked me to, and I could. So just really slow down a bit and don't jump from thing to thing. Don't jump from cause to cause or country to country. Settle down for a little bit and really spend some time asking the Lord which cause he wants you to champion. Too many options also keep this type frozen. They might not even make a decision. You might not even go do anything because there's so many options. The other thing is that you'll probably want to go where you already know somebody and like somebody. And that leaves out a lot of the world that doesn't have anybody there to invite you, right? So you're going to want to gather friends to go with you, go with a team of kindred people, or hook up with another type, like a strategic thinker that can lead you into the unknown with a team.
Well, this has been very fun and insightful to be introduced to each of these goer types. Now, we're going to transition a little bit to ask a question that we like to ask on pretty much every episode. And many of our listeners serve on missions committees or are church leaders. So, what advice do you have for them for how to invite each of these goer personalities into global missions?
So be aware of what type you are, because you will likely use the words and language that you prefer. And so I would go take this quiz if I were you, find out what you are so that you know what kind of language you're using. You're probably recruiting like people like you. So if you use statistics all the time and that's all you use, then you may be leaving out a population that you could mobilize. So I love to, when I'm sitting down with a new person that I'm recruiting, or a group, I have them all take this quiz and they can see themselves in the picture. Let them see themselves in the picture. And then as you learn about the five different types, you can learn different language to use while you're speaking to them. Like if you got a meaning and purpose person in front of you, you can use some statistics and you can say, like, God said to do it, so go, and they'll nod their heads. Yes, they agree. But when you tell them, look, your unique gifting is needed over there, like they're going to light up and you can have influence. So you'll use the different kinds of words that would help a person see themselves in the picture. And we often just think there's one right way, one right person. So just open up your minds a little bit to think that there might be that adventure seeker who seems a little crusty and you're not quite sure how they would do over there. Like, take those people especially and mentor them individually, and don't ask them to do a book study, but take them to a mosque right away. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to choose mobilization activities also that will relate to all the different types.
So being aware of your own tendencies and personality type in this regard. And that can affect how we mobilize others. I appreciate that. That's very helpful. So, Jeannie, if any of our listeners would like to learn more about this topic, what resources would you recommend to them?
Yeah, I would say you can download that free chapter right in the show notes if you want to, or get the book Across the Street and Around the World. It will give you a whole big picture of what I'm talking about. But also, you can take the quiz, obviously. And then I would say just go to my website. I have so many resources for mobilizers to use with people that would attract the different types, right? So for example, if you should do a book study probably, right? And so there is a small group guide that you can use with the Across the Street and Around the World. And while you're doing the guide, why not do a trip to the mosque and have them eat food on the floor with their hands? So in the small group guide, I have ways that it appeals to all five types, the way that I'm having you structure the small group. So I would say those are 3 things you could do right now just to get started.
That is great. So many helpful resources. And I know after visiting your website, there are just tons of things there. And obviously a lot of your experience contributing to these resources that you are providing. So we do encourage our listeners to check out Jeannie's website. The URL is jeannie-marie.com. And we will also be linking that in our show notes so you can access it easily there. I think what I really appreciate about your book is just the way you address this tension of local outreach and global missions. And I think that will be very beneficial to our listeners wherever you are at. So in a moment, I have just one final question for Jeannie. But before we get to that, if any of our listeners would like to contact you, how would they be able to do that?
The best thing is just to really go to my website, because email is probably the best way to get a hold of me. I'm also on Instagram at Jeannie M. Marie. And so just go to my website. You can email me from there.
Now to our last question here. If you were standing today in front of a missions committee and a pastor of a local church, what is one thing you might want to say to them?
You have people in your church that you are shepherding and growing. Let some of them go. Let some of them go. 1% of them, 5% of them, encourage them. Go and tap them on the shoulder. Look for them. Go fast and pray. Who are those 5 global goer types that are sitting right in front of you every day, every week? Who are they? They need you as a leader to go and call those things out in them. Go tell them, hey, I want you to consider this, and we will send you, and get to know them and call out what God's already gifted in them. And don't discount the people that might not be the traditional thing you might think of.
Great advice. Jeannie, thank you for joining us again today on the Global Missions Podcast.
Thank you. That was such a pleasure, and I can't wait to see what all the global goer types you all are.
Yes. Well, that was a great conversation with Jeannie Marie. Thanks for joining us for this episode. We want to let you know that you can join us again in 2 weeks for a great conversation with Lizette Goer about how missionaries can practice Sabbath rest. This episode is brought to you by the Global Missions Toolbox, an online collection of resources especially for senders, pastors, missions committees, and family and friends of workers sent to serve in missions. Join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.